Hello, hello. Welcome to TKW Mental Health. I am your host. Today, we will be covering the topic coping with grief and loss. I found some intriguing information as I was scouring the internet. It's by Melinda Smith, MA, Lawrence Robinson, and Janine Siegel, PhD. Coping with grief and loss. You know, we all go through grief. We all have experienced the loss of a loved one, some closer to us than others. But when it comes to a child, even parents, you know, when you lose your parents, you know, for some, I know it can't be easy. But for me, personally, I always speak on the loss of my daughter. And here it says, what is grief? Grief is a natural response to loss. It is the emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love has been taken away. Often the pain of loss can feel overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult and unexpected emotions, from shock or anger to disbelief, guilt, and profound sadness. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think straight. These are normal reactions to loss, and the more significant the loss, the more intense the grief will be. There are different things that people grieve. Sometimes it may not have to be with the death of someone. Like now, I am grieving the loss of a career, the loss of my ability to use my left arm. So we grieve many things, and we grieve them in many ways. We hurt. We don't know how to counteract those things. Coping with the loss of a loved one or something you love is one of life's biggest challenges. You may associate grieving with the death of a loved one, which is often the cause of the most intense type of grief, but any loss can cause grief, including subtle losses in life can trigger a sense of grief. For example, you might grieve after moving away from a home, graduating from college, changing jobs, obtaining an on-job injury. Whatever your loss, it's personal to you. So don't feel ashamed about how you feel or believe that it's somehow only appropriate to grieve for certain things. If the person, animal, relationship, or situation was significant to you, it's normal to grieve the loss you're experiencing. Whatever the cause of your grief, though, there are healthy ways to cope with that pain. In time, you learn to ease your sadness, and that's with all grief. You know, some things we truly don't get over. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but we learn to embrace those things. Time allows you the space to grieve and the space to heal according to your will. The grief of losing a loved one, whether it's a close friend, spouse, partner, parent, child, or other relative, few things are as painful as losing someone you love. After such a significant loss, life may never quite be the same. But in time, you can ease the sorrow, start to look at the future, and eventually come to terms with your loss. Now, this is the part, the grieving process. The grieving process looks different for everyone. And no two people grieve the same. No two people feel the same way. Grieving is a highly individual experience. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. How you grieve depends on many factors, including your personality and coping style, your life experience, your faith, and how significant the loss was to you. The grieving process takes time. For some, it could be a day. For some, it could be a week. For some, a few weeks. For some, a few years. Me, a few years, because it was like back to back, back to back, back to back. But it's okay to allow yourself to process these events that are considered. They are natural events. There's nothing that says these events are unnatural. Patients facing terminal illness, but many people have generalized them to have other types of negative life changes and losses, such as the death of a loved one or a breakup. You know, people could grieve the fact that they're sick and they're carrying an illness. So we only, think of grieving in the aspects of death, when there are many things that we can grieve. And the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. If you are experiencing any of these emotions following a loss, it may help to know your reaction is natural and that you will heal in time. However, not everyone who grieves goes through all these stages, and that's okay. And not everyone who goes through these stages will go through them in that particular order. You can go through depression first. You can go through denial. Because I believe when my daughter passed, I went through acceptance first. No. I would have to say I went through denial. And then bargaining. Acceptance. And then depression. I say acceptance because of how I handled the situation. Not that I accepted the fact that she's gone. I wasn't given time. Like many people are given time to grieve. Many of us are not. We're just put in a situation and we have to run with it. If you're feeling any emotions following a loss, it may help to know that your reaction is natural. Some people resolve grief without going through any of these stages. There is not a typical response to loss. There is no typical response to loss. Here's a few myths. The pain will go away the faster if you ignore it. Myth. Fact. Trying to ignore your pain or keep it from surfacing will only make it worse in the long run. For real healing, it is necessary to face your grief and activity and deal with it. Myth. It is important to be strong in the face of loss. Fact. Feeling sad, frightened, or lonely is normal reaction to loss. Crying doesn't mean you are weak. You don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. Showing your true feelings can help them and you. Myth. If you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry for the loss. Fact. Crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only way. Not everyone can cry. Everyone deals with death or any type of loss in their own way. Grieving. Myth. Grieving should last a year. Fact. There is no specific timeline for how long you have to deal with the grief process that you're going through. It's different from person to person. Myth. Moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. Myth. That's a myth. Fact. Moving on means you accepted your loss, but that's not the same as forgetting. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of someone or cope with that pain in time. In intricates, like in silhouettes, in vignettes, in short phrases. You don't have to cope with it all at once. So when I say grief can be a roller coaster. It really can be a roller coaster. Instead of a series of stages, one day you might be okay. The next day you may be experiencing sadness and depression. Some days you may go through denial, like looking at a picture, and still in denial, like this person is not here. I'm not understanding why this person is not here. Bargaining, you like, Lord, they're gone, or It could be the fact that they're still in the morgue. This is what I did. My daughter was still in the morgue. And I said, well, Lord, you raised Jesus. You raised Lazarus from the dead. Yeah, you raised Jesus too from the dead. Please raise my daughter. I was bargaining with God. And I was hoping by the time I walked back into that morgue that my daughter was going to be sitting on the table like the stories I heard. But that didn't happen for me. So, it was even harder for me. Symptoms of grief. You might feel like you're going crazy. You might feel like you're living in a bad dream. You might feel like, turning your back on God and all your spiritual beliefs. But just remember that these are normal. Don't let anyone tell you that what you're feeling and what you're going through is not normal, because it is normal. And until they go through something, and we pray they don't, you will experience what I'm trying to relate to you. Emotional symptoms of grief: shock and disbelief, sadness, guilt, fear, anger. Physical symptoms of grief: fatigue, nausea, lowered immunity, weight loss or weight gain, aches and pains. I lost a lot of weight. I felt guilty because I know I love my daughter, but did I display it? Did I tell her enough? Did she know that I loved her? So I felt that guilt. I became angry because, I was trained to serve a God, but I was trained to serve him in a certain way, that he was a genie in a bottle. I talk about that in my book. The Psycho Within Voices is the Psycho, Psycho Within Voices. How, I was trained one way, but as I began reading my Bible, I now know, as of today, I do not want any more religious experiences. I want their spiritual experiences. Someone I love dearly said, we are humans, but we're spiritual first. We are spiritual beings experiencing a human connection. So with that being said, I had to let go of everything I learned. And I have made up my mind to no longer sit under religiosity. I don't want to follow religiosity. I want us to follow God's spirit and that alone. And that, takes time too, because we grow up in a certain way, believing things should be a certain way. And when, it's hard when you learn, you begin to teach what you learn. But it's okay to unlearn those things, because people will follow you to get something. If they're in a place and they're stuck and they feel like, okay, this is about to happen, I'm going to follow them. And then they follow you, and then they fall right back into that religious spirit. It's like, well, I could have stayed where I was for this. I don't want my business, when people leave one counselor to get help for one thing, I want to be able to give them what they're searching for. I want to be able to tell them that, no, there's something different about me. I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm hoping, I can go ahead and get things situated with this arm so I can do some things. And I don't know. It's all in God's hands at this time. There's types of grief: anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, complicated grief. So with all the grief that you experience, you have to seek some type of support. Here in Montgomery, Alabama, it's called Compassionate Friends, and I know they are located across the world. It's a group support system that you go visit a church. It's just kind of like an AA meeting. You introduce yourself, you talk about what you're going through, and there's other people there to support you, and you see that you're not alone. And that's the main thing to remember, that you are not alone on this journey. I know that I pray that no one else experiences what I'm going through, But I know that's impossible because there will be others. But I want it set so I can tell other people that, it's okay to draw comfort in your faith, but it's also okay to dial 911 and dial up Jesus at the same time. My 911 doesn't look like your 911. Whatever 911 support you need, please utilize it. It just may save your life. Until next time, I love you. Be blessed.